Hello, I hope you're doing wonderful. My name's Dan. This channel is really devoted to sharing insights, advice, and our own experiences regarding preaching the gospel abroad. And this is something that I've shared a lot of different videos about that would pertain to either short-term visits or even permanently living overseas, like my family has been doing for these past couple years. But today, I actually want to maybe not share as much of my own advice, but rather give you all a few book recommendations that I have found extremely helpful, and maybe you will too. So I'm actually not a huge reader. I do enjoy reading, but unfortunately in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, sometimes reading is pushed off into a lower priority activity and hobby. However, there have been several just incredibly inspirational and molding books that I have read over the years that have really, I felt like, prepared me and trained me and even inspired me to consider doing overseas evangelism type work. And so these are just 3 books I want to share with you all today. And of course, all of these books come a distant second to the scriptures, to the Bible itself. None of these books even can compare to the wisdom and insight that God's Word can have for someone seeking to do this kind of work. And so these books should be read with that in mind. These are not infallible works. These are simply man's own appraisals and ideas and thoughts regarding this work that I think for the most part are inspired from God's Word. However, we need to, as always, take the good, leave the bad, read with discernment and with some amount of skepticism as we kind of weigh different things that these authors are telling us to do. So the first book I want to talk about is Shadow of the Almighty by Elizabeth Elliot. And I wish I had an actual paper copy of this book to kind of show you guys. When you move abroad and you take all your possessions and try to fit it into 4 checked luggages, things like books are heavy and take up space pretty quickly, and so we left almost all of our books in the US. But this is a book that I've read just numerous times, and I have electronic form of it to reference. Really enjoyable book. This is a biography of Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot was a missionary in the 1940s and 50s. He and his family went down to South America, to Ecuador, to teach the gospel to natives there. And during his efforts to do so, he was tragically killed. And so this biography is assembled and written by his wife Elizabeth that really used a lot of his journal entries, a lot of his written correspondence, and then of course kind of told the story of his life. And so I actually really prefer reading biographies and writings of these more old-timey missionaries of past generations. I think there is a grit and a conviction that is more obvious in some of these older workers of the gospel in past generations, perhaps more so that I seek is common today. And so I enjoy reading about their sacrifices and their conviction and their faith. Maybe the most famous quote from Jim Elliot is, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." So that's just something that is just worth pondering through and worth thinking about. Jim Elliot, when he was 20 years old, he wrote this in his journal: "Lord, make my way prosperous, not that I achieve a high station, but that my life may be an exhibit to the value of knowing God." And I just feel like, wow, I don't know too many 20-year-old young men thinking in those terms, writing those sorts of things down, praying those sorts of prayers. And so Jim was one of those types of men. And so I appreciate learning about him, hearing about him, and seeing the faith and the conviction that he had in his life, and having that written down for me as a path to follow as I'm seeking to live a similar life was a really influential book during a very specific and formative period of my life. The next book is called Missionary Methods by Roland Allen. Okay, I'll try to include a link of all these books in the description below here, but this is actually a pretty old book. This was written in 1912, I believe, so it's been around for a while, and it's a really fascinating book. So the book's premise is that one of the most powerful demonstrations of disciple making and evangelism can be seen when you open the book of Acts, you open the New Testament, and you see what the Lord was able to accomplish through Apostle Paul and his methods. And so he kind of introduces the book that within one 10-year span, there was strong and self-sustaining churches in 4 Roman provinces, major regions within Rome. And so the thing that he draws our attention to is that Paul did that without many of the mechanisms and the attempts to update and revolutionize evangelism that are common today. Paul accomplished that without a missions board, without a missionary society, without schools and Bible institutes and all these other things that we try to add to make our evangelism and church planting and disciple making more successful. Paul didn't use those. And so the premise of the book is maybe before we resort to seeking to revolutionize the process, maybe there is benefit to considering what was Paul's approach. What was Paul's methods? What are things that he did when he was going about this great work? And perhaps we'd be better suited looking within the text of God's Word to know how we should go about this important work of spreading the gospel, instead of looking around the world and using the world's methods and mechanisms and approaches to do this sort of thing. And so it's a fascinating book that I would really strongly recommend. Okay, and the final book I'll share with you guys, I actually have a paper copy of this one. It's called We Are Not the Hero. And other than having just a fantastic cover photo, this is an incredibly helpful book. This was recommended to me after I had kind of begun the process of moving to Sierra Leone. And I was trying to think about my approach in doing so, my approach in the work that I would be doing here. This book really highlights some of the mistakes that foreigners make when they enter a different country from their own, that oftentimes they bring more than just the gospel with them. They also bring their own culture, their own traditions, their own American theology, their own American way of doing things, their own American mechanisms and plans and cultures and way of teaching and all this kind of stuff. And we bring that into a context where that is not the most effective thing, and even it's a damaging thing. And so when that happens, not only does it give the terrible impression that Christianity is an American religion, but really what that results in is American churches that worship in American ways, that talk about things in American styles, that really reflect American standards instead of the local context evaluating God's Word and then letting that organically and naturally develop into something that is indigenous and self-sustaining. And so this book really tries to identify what are those negative, harmful habits that we need to leave behind us when we enter a foreign country, and instead employing tactics that would encourage self-sustaining churches, indigenous practices and habits that would not depend upon foreign structure, foreign tradition, foreign funds, foreign oversight, foreign teachers, but rather developing self-sustaining indigenous churches within their local context. So those are probably the top 3 books outside of God's Word that I would recommend to anyone who is seeking to learn and think more about doing this kind of thing. However, I'd be super glad to hear any recommendations that you all have or any books on this subject that you guys would recommend, so feel free to drop those in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing to this channel, to this video. If this is something that you found value in, then that's just something that can indicate to YouTube that they should share this content with more and more people, and therefore more people get to hear about these good books and other content that I provide on the channel. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have just a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next video.